Hi, I'm Nelson Montana, and you are watching for BassPlayersOnly.com.
Hi, everyone. John Liebman here. You're watching the #1 site for learning bass online, ForBassPlayersOnly.com, where I've taken the frustration out of learning bass so you can build confidence, have fun, and just enjoy making music. It's not for everyone. It's ForBassPlayersOnly.com. We've got a very special guest this week. You may know him from YouTube or from the internet in general. He gets around. He's all over the place. Very special. Very happy to have him this week. Nelson Montana. How are you, Nelson?
Hey, John. Good to be here. Thanks.
Oh, so good to have you. I've known of you for a long time. I've seen a lot of your stuff. You're so into the bass and music in general. So let me get one thing out of the way first. You play a lot of instruments,
Yes.
and judging from your background, I'm pretty sure ForBassPlayersOnly.com is the most appropriate site to conduct an interview with you. So are we both in the right place?
I would say so. Well, bass is my main instrument, but it isn't my first instrument.
Right. You played drums, you played piano, and you play like 11 instruments in total or something like that?
Yeah, something around there.
Well, how did it get started? Tell me about your musical upbringing and how you ended up playing the bass.
Well, when I was very young, I always wanted to play guitar. Oddly enough, I was attracted to those sort of Dwayne Eddy bass lines.
Oh, yeah.
So maybe I really wanted to play bass all along.
The twangy sound.
The twangy, boom, 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 the cool, very cool stuff. But, I never got the guitar. The older brother got the piano because in those days, the older child got the music lessons. And so I have sort of this backwards approach. I wound up playing drums. I think my mother bought me a set of drums to keep me quiet keep me out of trouble during the summer.
Not to keep you quiet.
Not to keep me quiet, no. But through the drums, it's interesting. You have almost a sort of backwards approach to music because as a drummer, it's not a musical instrument. Drummers may argue that point, but it's not a musical instrument. So, but you're taking in what everybody in the band is doing and you're gluing it together. So right from the start, I wasn't interested in being in, garage bands. I wanted to be in original bands, and I would always be telling everyone what to do, but I didn't understand music. It was just the art of it. So I would sing melodies and sing rhythms and sort of arrange from the drums. So that was my initial.
Interesting. That just naturally happened to you?
Yeah, well, I thought I was going to be an artist by trade. So I just sort of like switched it over to music. It was just sort of an artistic approach to music.
Artist, you mean like paint and colors?
Yes, painter and pencil. So, but I always loved fiddling around with the bass player's bass. It was just, I just loved it. I always connected to it. As a drummer, I connected to it. Not even so much as something else we could get into, not even so much being in sync with the bass, but sometimes being counterpoint to the bass on the drums could have some interesting effects.
You would have been about how old?
I was a little bit of a late starter. I was about 15.
Oh, okay.
So, but I started playing in clubs very early. I was 17 years old and I was playing in clubs.
Yeah.
So that was fun. But I finally, at a certain point, again, a little bit later, I was already in my 20s. I decided, let me just buy a bass and figure this thing out. And on the bass, I started out playing melodies. I didn't learn scales or even understand the fretboard. I was playing melodies on one string. And it's funny how sometimes the thing that you start out doing when you play an instrument is the thing that you sort of becomes your personality. So I tried to apply that approach of playing melodically. And this was right around the time the Police came out and Sting had those very spacious backwards rhythms, which were kind of cool. And they were easy to figure out. Yeah, it was cool as hell.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the beginning. And then from there, the guitar was close enough. And I think a lot of people tend to see music via their instrument. And I think playing another instrument can only help you at your main instrument. That's been my belief.
So once you discovered the bass, you mentioned Sting. Was he one of your influences? And did you have any others?
Well, again, since I played drums for so long, I had my favorite bass player as a drummer. the guys I liked.
Such
And
as?
it was pretty varied. It was Chris Squire, certainly, Paul McCartney for the compositional approach
Well,
to.
when you mentioned melodic, yeah, that's the first place my mind
That's
went,
it.
Paul.
It's funny. People talk about the thing about McCartney that a lot of people don't get is if you're playing bass for a year, you could probably play what McCartney plays, but he had this brilliant sense of composition to his parts. And that's something.
It's not just playing it, but it's knowing what to play. That's why I've always described him as just magical. He's got an uncanny ability to know exactly what a song needs.
And it's something that you wouldn't think of.
Yeah. Right.
So, which is wonderful. But I like jazz. Scott LaFara is my guy. I absolutely love him. And I remember telling you, I was on a gig and I was talking to the bass player and I said, I really like all those guys who play on those Motown songs.
All those guys?
He goes, that's all one guy. I'm like, what?
Well, Bob Babbitt
Jamerson,
played
of
on
course,
some of them, and Bob Babbitt and
Bob Babbitt.
Other than Jamerson, of course, who you're referring to, but I don't know. There was talk that Carol Kay played on some, or Joe Osborne.
But she didn't really do Motown, though. Carol
well, I mentioned that specifically because I heard that or read that somewhere, but it was Jamerson, and for a handful, it was Bob Babbitt. Yeah,
and Bob Babbitt when Jamerson couldn't make it.
Yeah.
So through that, there was a lot of combination of styles that fell into place, and that was sort of the foundation of it all.
I came across an interesting quote from you saying, I believe every musician should have knowledge of the role of the bass. It makes you a better overall musician.
Yeah.
Would you care to elaborate on that?
Yes, because the bass is essentially voice leading, which is another thing that a lot of people don't really get. The bass dictates movement, and it can do it in many ways. It doesn't necessarily have to be root notes stating chords. Actually, one of my favorite bass players, speaking of which, would be Bach. I mean, Bach was the cat. He treated the bass like just a second melody. It's a melody on the bottom.
I can't imagine how he did what he did. Those fugues and just, oh my God, without a sequencer or a.
Yeah, it would sound good on a sequencer. So yeah, that too was a big influence on me. And it's funny because I'm sure you've come across this. You work with musicians and they just figure, well, you play with the basses. I don't know the bass. Like, well, you should know the bass because it dictates so much of where the music is going. A lot of guitar players would think in terms of putting the bass in a recording, putting it first, lay down the foundation. Well, that's one element of the bass, but not necessarily the only element of the bass. When I record, I tend to actually do a rhythm guitar part first, and then I want to see how that bass line is going to connect with the melody. So this is where learning the different instruments and their role really helps in the role that you take on. I said the same thing about drummers. All drummers should play a musical instrument, and all musicians should probably play some drums to understand.
Oh, you're getting in some very dangerous territory.
Oh, so sorry.
Drummers should learn about music, and musicians should learn about drums.
Exactly. Let the hate mail begin.
Interesting what you just said, because I would just instinctively lay down the drum track first. That just feels.
Well, you have to play to a drum track, of course. Yes.
Yeah, but you said you'd lay down the rhythm guitar track.
Well, to a drum. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. So it's implied or understood that.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Okay. Well, so throughout your career, I know you've done a lot of so-called sideman work. But I think you're best known as a solo artist and maybe a YouTuber. Is that about right? What would you say you do?
In later years, yes. I was a young dad, so I had to make a living at music. So I'm not going to say I dashed the hopes of becoming a rock star or a jazz star or whatever it might be, but making a living was paramount. That it just had to be that. So whatever it took to do that, I did. And it all worked out just fine. But after being a sideman for so many years, I decided, I've done that. and I wanted to explore, and what the technology provided with computers. I always wanted to do arranging and orchestration, and now I can, because the technology allows for it. And it's also having something to show for your work. You could do a million gigs. I know so many people that have done a lifetime, a career, and the music is gone in the air. And what do they have to show for it? You know, the stories. But by recording, and suddenly, oh, I did this, or I can do this, or here's an example of you know, a stage of my life. And that was tremendously rewarding, and it kind of worked out.
Well, tell me what's keeping you busy these days, Nelson.
Well, I'm continuing with the record. You know, you're always looking for something to do. As a composer, you're always wondering, did I write my last song? You know, as a musician, I'm sure, you know, if you've done the gig circuit, you tend to judge yourself by how well you played last night sometimes.
Or in the car on the way home.
You know, you have a bad gig and you're like, who am I kidding? I can't do this. You know, I stink. You know?
I've been there. I remember driving home. I did so many gigs in Florida. I used to know the toll booth operators on the Florida Turnpike. You just reminded me of that whole feeling, everything driving home from the gig. You know, if only I could do this, or how come I couldn't lock in, or this was really good, or, you know, so I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, what the home recording allows, which is wonderful, another thing I think musicians should get into, is I have no one to blame. I can't say, yeah, that
sucks,
guitar player
doesn't
wasn't locking, because I'm the guitar player. Well, like the drummer was late, or he was drunk. Yeah, well, what can I say? Yeah, it allowed me to have sort of my own focus and my own vision. And on some instruments, I'm limited. I know that. But in a way, the limitation is interesting because it forces you to be more artistic. You know, instead of relying on your licks, which we know a lot of guys tend to do, or your chops, or whatever it might be, it's like, I've got to make music. And I tell this to people all the time. They're like, well, I can't play piano. I'm going to take piano lessons. And like, to write string lines, you need two fingers. You don't need to be Oscar Peterson to make music. So just make music. That's the thing. And I mean, as a bass player and as a drummer, I wanted to be able to do everything. I wanted to have the most technique. I wanted to have a concept of everything that was out there that was able to do. You can't do everything ultimately, obviously, but I wanted that big technique under my belt. But with other instruments, it's like, I can only do so much, so I'll make some music and take that approach.
Let's talk about bass. As you might know, I've got so many people coming to For Bass Players Only every day to learn bass, I mean, not to make a career out of it, but just to learn to play and to have fun. Mm-hmm. And most of them tend to be in their 50s, 60s, 70s, yep, sometimes even older. So what advice do you have for those people who want to learn bass? What do you think is important for them to know?
Well, I've taught and I've had a lot of older students. And I think the main thing, honestly, is to have fun with it. That may sound like a bit of a cliche, but I think so many people get caught up in what is in their way. They get caught up in the obstacles. Oh, I need this. I need to learn this. I need this equipment and all that. And it's really pretty simple. Go out and buy yourself a $150 Squier bass and just bang around with it and see what you can get and try to figure things out by ear. Take it slowly and have fun. But I've always been the type that I wanted to sound good. I was never like, oh, let's just make some, like these dad bands. Let's still go make some noise and, you know, pretend we're rock stars. I like that. But it's up to the individual. But if you really want to play, I guarantee if you do play and you put some time in, and it doesn't take a tremendous amount of time, but you do it every day, you'll get better. And there it is. That's the secret. As simple as that. You get just the consistency.
What should they be doing to get some basic proficiency, basic technique on the bass?
You know, I remember I'm sort of a combination of legitimately trained and street musician. But I mean, I do have classical training, and I understand theory and those elements of legit training. But there's something.
Do you play Fender bass too?
You remember that when they called it that?
I
The
do.
old union used to go down. We needed somebody who plays Fender. Okay. We need somebody who plays Rhodes.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No. I bought a book that I think was called Scales and Modes. And it's like, I was off to the races. That was it. Showed me the scales, showed me the different positions. And then I'm like, there you go. And then you buy, I bought a Beatles book of chord changes. How hard is that? Just play along with the chords. And, and again, as you move along, it depends how curious you are. If you want to continue learning, there's plenty out there to learn. But if you just want to get going, there's also plenty of things to just get you going. And I think, and that's another thing. When I give lessons, I was never one of these guys who had a lesson plan and do this lesson and come back. I'm like, what do you want to learn? What do you like? You want to figure out Ozzy Osbourne tunes? I'll show you Ozzy Osbourne tunes. And I think that's the thing. You have to like what you're doing. You have to like the music.
Do you play bass with a pick?
Both.
Okay, both. Which do you tend to just, if you're just for fun, you tend to gravitate to your fingers or to?
I'm mainly a finger player, but I think the pick allows for a different feel and a different sound.
Hey, we get an opportunity to piss off some more people right now.
Here we go. I'll tell you a little story about
how many strings should a bass? Oh, never mind.
Right. Oh, let's not go there. I can't turn the computer. I can show you my line of basses. I have 1 5-string and like 94 strings. But I was on a gig once. I was on my way to a gig, and as I was loading my amp up into the trunk of the car, it fell on my hand and sliced my finger open. My index finger. I wrapped it up. I couldn't play with my fingers, so I had to play with the pick.
Uh-huh.
And I noticed that for a lot of the stuff, it wasn't that much of a difference. A few things didn't work quite as well, and I also noticed a few things worked better. So that's the thing. I mean, pick, fingers, thumb. Why not use it all? Why not?
Well, it depends on what the music needs. Serve the song, right?
Well, then you have Steve Swallow, Steve Swallow, who plays jazz with a pick, which I don't even know if that works all the time. But there you go. You break the rules, and why not? Just as long as something works and you're making music, I play with your nose. Who cares? It's just.
There was a piano player, a comedian who played the piano. His name was Pete Barbuti. And he used to play the piano with his nose. He was on the Johnny Carson show, and he played was it humoresque? Who was that? Dvorak? With his nose on national television. I met him one time.
Make music any which way.
James Galway, the flute player from, where was he from? Ireland.
Yeah, sure.
I saw him with the Detroit Symphony, and he played piccolo, two piccolo flutes up his nose.
There you go.
You thought you were making a joke, huh?
There you go. Do you not play with a pick, or you play both, or?
You know what? I don't really play with a pick, but I like it. I used to play guitar for a long time before I played bass, and I just haven't played until I was laying down some tracks for some of my lessons, and some of the stuff needed a pick, and I've come to really admire Bobby Vega and Carol Kay, of course, and Paul McCartney, and I'm friends with David Ellefson, formerly of Megadeth. I don't think I've ever seen him play without a pick. Yeah. And a lot of the heavy metal guys, I'm not well, my son used to I took him, or he took me to all these metal bands, and I'd see, I don't understand that sing.
Yeah, I don't like the growls. I think some of the playing is great. I don't like the growls.
Yeah, I think a lot of those drummers are unbelievable.
Yeah.
But in answer to your question, no, it's on my list. Like two-handed tapping is on my list. I've dabbled in that, but I never really had the time to sit down. When you're 20 years old, you can just, I'm about as excited about tapping right now as I was about slapping back in the 80s. And I had more time in the 80s to, I'm going to sit down and figure this out. And I did. And now, I got, kids and a house and a wife, and, so.
Oh yeah, you have a life. I got into the tapping thing a while back and kind of like went through it. I think it has its place, but there are some guys who are just so amazing at it. But it's its own skill. To me, it's not really, I don't want to say it's not bass playing, but.
Well, I don't think when John Patitucci solos on a 6-string bass way up here, is that bass playing? It's
Well,
soloing
it's
on an instrument that happens to be a bass, but it's not functioning in the traditional role as the bass player. One
right,
five, 1 5,
right.
you know.
But even there could be some arguments. I mean, well, I've been accused of not playing bass. Like, you solo on bass like a guitar player. I'm like, okay, I'll take it.
So if you're soloing, it means you're expressing yourself. And it's actually, desirable, I think, for a solo with a bass soloist to play in the upper register, because this is your chance. This is where it's okay. It's legitimate to be up there. I used to
Yeah,
play with this old lady at the, what was it called? The Grand Bay Hotel in Coconut Grove, Florida. Just piano and upright bass. This old lady. And if I went on the upright bass, if I went higher than a D or God forbid an E on the G string, she would
you're in
turn
my
around.
territory.
She would turn around. She says, "Hey, cut it out. You're a
Working
bass
my side
player.
of the
Get
street."
down where you belong." Sorry. But she was right. If I ventured up too high. I came across another quote from you.
Okay.
Oh, Greg, good time for the gardeners to be outside. I hope you can't hear that too well.
Nice studio, by the way, you got there.
Oh, thank you very much. You said, "I don't know why this bugs me, but it does. What I will never understand is when anyone over the age of 50 talks about how they've always wanted to do something or wanted to go somewhere or own something, and it's well within their means, but they say someday." Talk to me about that. Does that sound like something you said?
I just put that up, a little rant I put up on Facebook, I believe, or LinkedIn. Or
It wasn't Facebook, but it was
okay.
Somewhere on the interwebs thing the kids are
picks
into.
Up all our thoughts. Yeah, that was just a random thought I had. It's, when people say that, it's I have always believed in having a sense of urgency. And
that's your New York upbringing, probably.
Yeah, perhaps. But I think it leads to more success, not necessarily monetary success, but
monetary sex.
I think if you want to get to something, wherever that might be, having a sense of urgency is important. And I find that when people say like someday, that kind of means never, and it's a form of laziness. And I don't like laziness. So I think if you want to do something, do it. Even if you fail, go for it. Try
what do you
it.
think about people who are retired and may never have thought about learning bass? Do you think they'd like it? I'm sure a lot of them would.
I think you have to be drawn to something. I think there has to be something there that says, I want to try that. I don't think you can just force something on somebody and say.
I wasn't thinking force, but it was more along the lines of, hey, I never thought of that. That would be fun. I love classic rock and soul and music from the 60s and 70s and, maybe a little funk R&B, a little James Brown,
Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely. I had a drummer friend over a while back. I was showing him Court of the Crimson King, which is pretty basic, but a great song, but a basic bass line. But the point was so he could hear music, not from the drums. And as he's playing, he's like, this is fun. And I'm like, yeah, it is. The bass is a lot of fun. The bass McCartney said that. McCartney's, when he had to play bass, he's like, I don't want to be the bass player. That's the fat guy in the back. And then he realized very quickly on, it's like, I could dictate everything from this instrument. And there it is.
What about the future, Nelson?
What about the future? Well, as I was saying before, you always wonder if your best work is behind you, but then the muse comes, and it's time to do something else. I just completed an album called Left Turn at Tradition, which is a jazz album.
I heard some of that.
Okay,
say the title again slowly so everybody gets it.
Left Turn at Tradition.
Left Turn at Tradition.
Right, because it's some traditional jazz, but done in an untraditional way. And I am playing all the instruments except for trumpet and sax. It's a weird thing because to a lot of jazz critics, they're like, what are you doing? This isn't jazz. And so we'll see how that goes. There's a few reviews about to come out. I'll see how scathing they are.
What would you be? Well, my signature sign-off question is, what would you be if you weren't a bass player? But I'll just have to expand it for you. What would you be if you
were a musician of some sort?
Not a musician of some sort.
If they took my license to play bass away, I'd probably want to just play guitar.
I think Ed Friedland, I asked him, what do you like to do other than outside of music? And he says, play drums. So I'm sure you can relate to
So
that.
give up on being a musician. I mean, I love singing. I think that everything has its own vibe. It's the reason why I like a lot of different types of music.
Yeah,
Each
but you're
type of music has its
still
own
in the
vibe.
music bailiwick here. What about outside of music? Do you have any
Outside
interest?
of music, um, something in the art field. And oddly enough, this is going to sound strange, I've always been attracted to detective work. I like the analysis of it. I think it's an interesting work. I'm a little too old for that. If I couldn't play music at this point, I would just retire completely and collect my Social Security. But and also I am involved in the fitness field, so I probably would just concentrate on that.
Oh, that's good. Detective. I always liked the detective shows. I used to watch Mannix. Remember that?
I love Maddox.
Yeah. I think Lalo Schifrin wrote. That's
Right, Lalo Schifrin did the theme.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, and Mission Impossible, of course.
I also have a channel, might be interested in some of your listeners, called Bass Players in the Wrong Band.
Interesting.
Where I play in the style of certain bass players in a band where it would be completely inappropriate.
I like you, Nelson.
So I have Chris Squire in U2. I have Carol Kay in Van Halen. I think the one that got the most hits is Les Claypool in Metallica, which almost happened.
Do you lie in bed at night thinking of these things?
I'm always looking for a way to try to be creative and try to express myself. And if somebody digs it, that's wonderful. If they don't, I try to enjoy it myself.
Well, you are a very interesting dude. I'm glad we got a chance to talk in person. Like I said, I've known about you for a long time, so it's so great to meet you in person, meet or whatever we're doing. And I wish you a lot of luck. I hope we'll meet in person someday soon.
Great.
And often. Congratulations. Keep up the good work and good luck with everything.
Thanks a lot, John. I enjoyed it.
Thanks to our special friend, Nelson Montana. I'm John Liebman. You are watching the #1 site for learning bass online, ForBassPlayersOnly.com, where I've taken the frustration out of learning bass so you can build confidence, have fun, and just enjoy making music. It's not for everyone. It's ForBassPlayersOnly.com. We'll see you all next week.